Dr. Shawn Baker, welcome to the Meat Mafia podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Well, it's certainly a pleasure to be here and to see you guys virtually. As you guys alluded to, I got to meet you in person before, which is kind of nice. So anyway, yeah. Thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun, and thanks for doing this. I mean, like I said, I think the more people we get that understand and promote and get out there and get this message out there that meat is a health food, the better. So thanks for doing this.
Yeah, it's cool for both of us too, because I think Dr. Baker, I think 2 months ago, I was fortunate enough to go on your podcast and speak to the Revero community, which was great because I think there are a number of people in there that have either like colitis, Crohn's, IBS, and have had a lot of success with the carnivore diet. And I mean, before we kick off, we honestly just wanted to thank you because, for us too, like many other people in the carnivore animal-based space, we came across your information in 2018. And that really jump-started us on this journey. And, now I know for me with colitis, I'm off all medication, not on any types of drugs or anything like that. So completely changed my life. So just wanted to thank you for all the work that you've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, and just that alone is enough. I mean, gosh, I can't tell you how many people that I've seen now that same sort of story, colitis, Crohn's disease, on and on and on. And it's just so rewarding to be able to have that impact on people. And so thanks for that. And thanks for continuing to share your story.
We could probably put a highlight reel together of people who have said Dr. Shawn Baker on our podcast, referencing you as their gateway into the carnivore world. So it's been pretty cool just, seeing, I think I came across your stuff like 2 years ago and just seeing, the trajectory of what you've done it's been amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's not, I'm not going to take credit for inventing people eating meat. I mean, that's been going on forever. But like I said, we live in an age now where it's easier to get information out there, which is, I think some of the people that have done this over the years prior to me didn't have that mechanism. So I've been very fortunate, and rightly so. I mean, you put yourself up to more criticism. If you get out there, you get the criticism as much as the accolades, and but it's fun. It's a fun time to see this stuff and, kind of get some validation of what you're doing. And anyway, what do you guys want to chat about?
I'm surprised no one's come at you yet for having the last name Baker and being a carnivore.
Yeah, we've heard some of that. Ken Berry and people, they've got, Berry and Baker and salad type names, and it's just, it is what it is. I mean, I think my ancestors might have been bakers and Germany or something like that. So who knows?
You can bake a steak.
And you can bake a steak. You can bake meat for sure. Bake a
also, before we dig into the good stuff, you're talking about how you've been an influencer of a lot of the big carnivore doctors in the space. Dr. Brian Lenskis, who's a mutual friend of the three of ours, great endocrinologist in San Diego. Yeah. He commented when I said that you were coming on the podcast, and he said, I just need you to collect the $50 that Dr. Baker owes me. Good luck and thanks. I don't know what he's referring to there, but
yeah, I'm not sure either. I think Brian's a great guy. Just to say that, Brian, if you're listening, continue to keep up the good work. But well, we can work on that if possible, if we need to.
Yeah, we'll dig into all of it. But I think a little background on you, Dr. Baker, would be great. We know when we got to meet you in person, we were talking about how you're, multi-sport, extremely high-level athlete, background in rugby. You're also an orthopedic surgeon. You spent time in the Air Force overseas. I think we would love to dig into all that and just learn a little bit more about, the steps along the way with your nutritional journey that's gotten you to the point where you're at now.
Yeah, I mean, there was no point earlier in my life did I ever see myself as being some sort of nutritional advice giver. I mean, that was so far from, anything I'd ever thought I would do. But I did from an early age have an interest in medicine. I knew I wanted to be a doctor probably somewhere in my teenage years, and started taking the necessary steps to do that. So, studying hard, getting a biology degree. I did get sidetracked with rugby for a while. I mean, I started medical school out of college, and then I got suckered into playing rugby and ended up being pretty good at it. And so I got selected to, recruited to go live in New Zealand to do that and play with some really high level stuff, and ended up kind of dropping out of medical school to do that. And then came back and wasn't quite ready to hang up the cleats yet. So I continued, I joined the military to continue my rugby career. At that time in the early 90s, that was a place to do it. So I ended up, playing rugby, but my day job was launching nuclear missiles. And so learned how to do that, did that for about 5 years, and then ended up going back into medical school. The Air Force then decided, was was willing to pay for it so I could finish my education. I continued to pursue sports. So I went from rugby. I think then I went into competitive powerlifting, where I was, reasonably successful. Ended up pulling a American record, several American records, national records, state records in the deadlift, culminating, I think, in a 771 point whatever, something, 350 kilogram deadlift, as a drug-free athlete. I've always been a lifetime drug-free guy. I've been pretty proud of that. From there, I go back into medical school, I did some strongman stuff. I ended up, doing I went to the very first ever national strongman championships in the United States. I think I took 5th place overall at that time, and, pretty decent, decent at it, but, I knew that I wasn't going to do some of the things required. And a lot of the drug usage in there just kind of turned me off the sport. Then I went into, Highland Games. I think I went from there and ended up winning some national titles and world championships in that, and then continued my surgical career. Finished, becoming an orthopedic surgeon, doing that for several decades. And then I got into rowing. I think, that's what I did next. Set American national world records in rowing, won a world championship in that. So that's been kind of my athletic career, my medical career. Along the way, as an orthopedic surgeon, I got into my mid-40s and started realizing that my health was starting to decline, like every other 40-year-old on the planet was seeming to do. Just getting older, fatter, sicker, things are hurting, and I didn't like that, very frankly, and so I started really delving into nutrition because I kind of maxed out the training side. I was training really hard, competing as an athlete. My training was very, very, excuse me, solid, but my nutrition probably was lacking. I was just kind of eating, I was eating a high protein diet, not eating a bunch of junk food, but I was, just not as healthy as I could have been. So I never went on a plant-based diet. Thankfully I was never sort of willing to do that, but I did go pretty low fat, very vegetable salad heavy, lost weight. I did lose weight doing that, but I was just frankly miserable. I mean, I was tired, cold, angry. No one liked me at the time because I was just always grouchy. So I quickly discovered that I couldn't maintain that. So I ended up doing more paleo and then ketogenic and low carbon ketogenic. And then finally, back in 2016, kind of found these wacko, nutty, crazy people doing carnivore diets. So it wasn't called carnivore at the time. I will take credit for calling it the carnivore diet. I named the carnivore diet before people were calling it the zeroing in zero carb diet, which was kind of confusing because, it was like, no, you're not eating canola oil, which is zero carb, and no, you're not drinking Diet Coke, which is zero carb, and yes, you're eating some dairy, which does have carbohydrates. So it was a really confusing sort of thing. And the focus was really just eating meat. And I just kind of, adopted some of their principles and called it the carnivore diet. And then, got some notoriety, going on Rogan's podcast, obviously was something that, brings a lot of attention to it. And I got a lot of positive attention, but I also got a lot of unwanted negative attention from the vegan mafia, so to speak. That decided that, oh my God, there's a guy telling people to eat meat, and he must be the devil incarnate. So, that's kind of the background story, and here I am 6 years later, still eating steaks every day and still arguably thriving. And it's been fun to see. It's been fun to see how it's kind of taken off, and it's gotten a life of its own. And there are now literally, I think at this point, probably as many as millions of people that have heard of the carnivore diet. Many of them have tried it with varying degrees of success. Most people find it is a positive experience for the most part.
Dr. Baker, when you were optimizing for performance back in your athletic days, what did your diet look like back then? Was it more kind of relying on genetics and eating what you wanted and just training hard? Or was there something more focused around your dietary plan back then?
Well, I think back then, I mean, you really, what I was focusing mostly is on strength sports. And so it was, a lot of food, a lot of protein, and a lot of training. And so that's really what it was. And I think that's still generally, in a general category, what most people want to be successful, particularly in those types of sports, are going to need to do. They're going to eat a lot of protein. They're going to eat a lot of food. And of course, you're gonna have to do the training. The training is probably the most important aspect of it, assuming you get adequate calories and protein, and then the rest of it kind of, you know, it's of less importance unless you're older or got some kind of illness or something like that. Then we find where you can really tailor things in, and that really makes a big difference.
And Dr. Baker, I think you mentioned in your book, The Carnivore Diet, you initially went down a paleo rabbit hole before you ended up going carnivore. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I was out there looking at all the paleo stuff and the paleo cookbooks and making all the paleo products, and yeah, I mean, and to be honest, I enjoyed it. It definitely was an improvement from where I had been. It wasn't where I ended up, and I felt, obviously carnivore for me provided me the most benefit ultimately. So that's where I am now.
When you hear I was just going to ask, when you hear people talk about carbohydrates in terms of performance, when you're eating steak now, do you see carbs as a limiting factor for your performance, or not having that carb intake?
I mean, again, I can only speak for myself, although it's curious and interesting. We're seeing so many high-level athletes now adopting this with tremendous success. I mean, there was a guy just, U.S. Olympic wrestling team, which fully carnivore. The guy just won the Big Ten decathlon, championships, carnivore. And so we're seeing a lot of MMA fighters, NFL athletes. So I think that there are many people that can do extremely well, extremely high level of athletic performance without the carbohydrates. Again, it's not that you don't need glucose to compete. I mean, we know that glucose is part of this, the fuel that we use when we're at high intensity. We're going to preference glucose. I mean, we've got this phosphocreatine system that allows us to do the really short, like 2-second burst type stuff, the real, but beyond that, then you start getting into glucose and glycolysis and anaerobic glycolysis before you get into the oxidative stuff. And I mean, I don't have any issues. I mean, I can only compare myself for my performance in the past when I was using carbohydrates versus now. There's been no decline in performance. And in fact, my performance has gotten better at a better body composition with better recovery and less. I think I perform with as good of intensity or better without the carbohydrates. Personally, that's me. Now, other people may have a different experience.
I mean, you've set world records on a carnivore diet with rowing. Is that right? Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And just, in fact, the other day I hopped on there and I'm number one in the world, in my age group, for the 50 plus category without much training at all, with very minimal training. I just hopped on there because I hadn't done it in 6 months or more. And I said, well, let's see what I can do. And I literally was the fastest guy in the world. So, yeah, I do it without carbs all the time.
Is it exciting for you to see, like, I know, someone like Noah Syndergaard, all-star pitcher for the Angels, he's adopted an animal-based approach to eating. I know he's really intentional about sourcing stuff from his farm. Is that exciting for you to see these mainstream athletes start to break into the carnivore space and see what their athletic performance could do over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I do think we're going to continue to see more and more athletes adopt this. I think it's initially, I've seen that overseas, in particular with some of the high level rugby players in New Zealand and Australia. Yes, it's exciting to see that. I think we're going to see more and more athletes adopting this. Some of them are reluctant to be public about it because it's sort of politically incorrect to eat meat, or it's becoming that way, or people want it to become that way. But yeah, I think more and more people, when at the end of the day, when the money's on the line, when your performance is all that matters between, being flipping burgers versus, starting for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yeah, the people are gonna discover that this is, an animal-based diet is hugely, hugely important. And whether you're 100% carnivore or you're mostly eating meat and, you have a few other things, I think we're going to see more and more of that clearly.
Well, and Brett, to your point, when you start looking at the other side of the aisle too, a lot of these athletes do fall for that political messaging and do start to go towards that vegan route of a diet. And you see them start to break down a little bit faster. I know it's somewhat anecdotal, but I've seen headlines of a lot of these athletes who adopt a vegan diet start to get injured more frequently. And, it could be random, but there's obviously, there is something to it when you look at it over a longer period of time.
Well, Canelo Alvarez was one of the most recent ones. Lewis Hamilton's just having an awful season now. I mean, there's a point. I think the harder the more difficult, the more physical the sport, the more strength dependent, the more contact and violent the sport, the less likely these sort of plant-based folks tend to do. So you see like a lot of these guys, Cam Newton, we can go on and on. There's all kinds of athletes that have tried this vegan experiment, and most of them have failed with that. And it's not just the anecdotal stuff. I mean, there's scientific studies looking at vegan healing. Like if you get an injury, they don't heal as well. And there's actually scientific medical literature that shows that. There's 4 studies that one particular author did that was looking at skin healing. This is a dermatologist from Italy, and I posted a number of her studies. 4 studies all clearly show that in every single situation, a vegan diet leads to poor tissue quality, poor tissue healing. It's not surprising to see it carry over to the athletic world.
I mean, the number of pictures and transformation stories that I've seen the last year alone of people that were formerly vegan or plant-based, you see the before and after picture before they go animal-based, and before their face is all broken out, their skin is flushed, they're bloated, they're talking about how irritable they were. And then you see them go animal-based. I'm not just saying this because all 3 of us love this diet. It's like, there's literally like this glowingness and vitality to their skin. And I even think about myself when I was healing myself with colitis. It was like I think one of the first things I did when I started going keto is I would eat a lot of steak with like cruciferous vegetables. I'm like, oh, steak and broccoli. And after I would eat it, I was like, damn, I feel pretty good, but I feel bloated. And then I started hearing more stories about, leptins and defense chemicals. And then as soon as I cut out the dark leafy greens and the cruciferous vegetables, my digestion was the best that it had ever been within a few days. So it's just interesting to hear those stories.
Yeah, and they continue to come in. This is one of those things. People say, "Well, it's a fad diet." People are going to do it, but the problem with that is it works so well for so many people, and the cream will rise to the top. And I see that. Obviously, I see it every day. I mean, I literally do consultations every day of the week, and a week does not go by where I don't get a whole bunch of vegans, ex-vegans that just tell me, "Mate, that diet wrecked my health, and I'm trying to rebuild all the things that I lost, whether it's sarcopenia, dental health, autoimmune issues, gut disturbances, skin issues, whatever, mental clarity." They find that they improve with an animal-based diet just over and over again. So there's something there for sure. When the science catches up to it, it'll probably be a while. We've got some studies in the literature now that are showing. In fact, it's interesting because there are not a lot of carnivore studies out there. There are several that are now been published, and every single study that's been published on a carnivore diet shows extremely positive results. And so if you want to have a hypothesis, the hypothesis you should have is based on all the anecdotal reports, the science that's out there so far, some of the historical information that we know with certain societies that were mostly animal-based, that an animal-based diet is clearly healthy. Instead, we choose to use standard American diet, burger and fry eaters, and say that's what meat eating does, when that's clearly not the case.
When did we lose that idea of eating meat, or when did we start to think about this idea of eating meat as being a bad thing?
Probably around 1917, when the Seventh-day Adventists founded the American Dietetics Association. The Seventh-day Adventists are very much a religion that strongly believes that meat is sinful and the root of lust and impurity, and so they sort of started nutrition. I mean, nutrition science literally was started by these folks that believe that way. So there's always been a religious undertone to nutrition, and they've well penetrated and well controlled the origins of nutrition, and they still can have a huge hold on that today. And so we've seen that for at least 100 years now.
Yeah, we had on Dr. Gary Fettke, and that was one of the big things that he hit in on, was the influence of Seventh-day Adventism in the U.S. dietary system, and how the original Kellogg cereal was literally created by John Harvey Kellogg to suppress sexual urges and to get men to stop masturbating. So they took away the meat and replaced it with a cereal loaded with refined grains and sugars. But it's just interesting how many people don't know this history. Like, I bet if you ask over 9 out of 10 people, no one would have any idea that this Kellogg cereal is rooted back into that. Do you ever think about that?
Well, I know about it now, so I mean, it's not something that's always on my mind, but
Yeah.
it's interesting. John Harvey Kellogg was correct. I mean, his postulate was red meat makes you sinful and lusty, and grain cereal will shut that down. And it turns out scientifically, there's actually a nice study that was done looking at replacing higher fat, low fiber diets with high fiber, low fat diets, and it showed a direct correlation with a drop in testosterone. So it works. I mean, what he did works, and it clearly has done what it's supposed to do.
Mm.
Dr. Baker, when you have people come to you looking to get into the carnivore diet, what sort of things do you start to tell them just to get them moving in the right direction? Because obviously, I think from your average person's perspective, eating all meat is a bit of an extreme move in one direction. So I'm curious how you approach talking to people about it.
Well, I mean, if people are coming to me, they've already sort of made that mental decision that that's something they like to try. So that's a different. But the guy on the street, if somebody's just random and they're just striking up a casual conversation and they're kind of interested about health and nutrition, first of all, I try to be an example for people. I'm like, look, I'm 55 years old. I'm in pretty good shape. I'm clearly doing some things right. And so people are curious about that. And I said, hey, I just eat a bunch of steak most days. And then they're like, what? And then I have to, go through the sort of the spiel about, how, meat has been sort of misaligned, misappropriately demonized and that type of stuff. But I mean, for the average person that says, I want to improve my health, and I'm like, well, what got you in the situation where you're either obese or have issues? And usually it's the typical junk food. That's what most people are struggling with. And I kind of talk to them about, the first thing, I don't care what someone's ultimate goal is, whether it is to cure depression or to get rid of colitis like Brett had to do.
Mm-hmm.
I tell people, you've got to first figure out this food relationship thing. Why are you eating? If you're eating for reasons outside of nourishing your body as a primary reason, then you've got some issues there. And it's not that I don't eat for pleasure. I mean, I just had a ribeye steak a few minutes before I came on here. It was damn good. I liked every bite of it. And I was very happy the whole time I was eating. But I mean, you got to get people to address these food addiction, non-nutritive reasons for eating, whether it's boredom, stress, emotional stuff, just because of what time it is. You just learn to eat for those reasons. And then once they start to do that, and it may take them a couple months, then they can start to focus on these other specific issues. But I think that's usually what most people have issues with.
Mm. One of the things that we love about your approach too, especially with the way you approach your eating from what we see, is that it's very simple. It's like you enjoy eating ribeyes and steak, and that's the basis of your diet. I feel like I've seen you go on phases before for maybe like a week or so where you'll incorporate more eggs or salmon or fish, but you very simply will say, look, I love eating ribeyes. I love the fat content. They're delicious. They satiate me. And when I'm hungry, I eat. And when I'm not hungry, I don't eat. And I feel like that's a really good way to approach it, because that's one of the biggest things that we hear with people that want to go on the carnivore diet is they don't necessarily know what to eat or how to approach those things. And you just make it very simple for people, which I think is important.
Well, I mean, I think that nutrition should be simple. I mean, we don't have a real elaborate ritual on how to go to the bathroom or how much air we inhale. I mean, there's no one telling you need to breathe 12 times a minute. No one's thinking about that. And, most animals in the wild, they don't have a stopwatch. They don't have an app. They don't have a menu. They're just eating what naturally comes to them. And I think this is something that we're a species like any other species, and we should have a diet that allows for that. It should be, how much do I eat till I'm full? When do I eat when I'm hungry? And there should be a food that allows you to do that, that doesn't lead to disease. Now, you could say, well, I could eat ice cream all day and eat it when I'm hungry, and I would enjoy it. But what are the results of that? The results are uniformly bad. So there should be a food that doesn't result in badness if you eat it in that way. As much as I need, eat when I'm hungry, don't eat when I'm not. And usually meat fills the bill pretty nicely with that. It has protein, which provides a pretty high level of satiation, which is an immediate effect of being full. And then if you have enough fat in there, it provides that long-term satiety. So I think meat fits the bill very nicely in that regard. So it should be simple. I mean, nutrition shouldn't be complicated. You shouldn't need a PhD to figure out how to eat. You shouldn't need it to ask somebody with a PhD on what to eat. Like I said, you should be able to explain it to your dog. I mean, dog, hey, here you go, dogs. This is what you got, and they're happy to eat, and they do pretty well.
It was that part of your motivation for starting Revero? And we should have mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast, that you've been building this company or a part of building this company, Revero, which is a telemedicine business. I'd be curious to hear more about your motivations for starting that, because I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a physician. I mean, this is what I trained to do. This is what I took an oath to do. And, like I said, I think the healthcare system does not allow people to do what they want to do in that regard. I think there's a lot to be desired with the modern healthcare system. And so we want to build an alternative. There are a lot of people that, either feel like me, or most of them are people that I've been able to influence to regain their health. And they're like, look, this is something that we need to do to help other people to do this, because there are literally millions and millions of people that are suffering unnecessarily, and they can't get the help they need, and the physicians largely are kind of clueless with this. And it's not that physicians are bad people or greedy or evil or in the employ of pharmaceutical companies knowingly. It's just that the system is just not set up to actually take care of people in a way that I think makes a meaningful difference for most people. I mean, we're good at putting Band-Aids on. As an orthopedic surgeon, yeah, I mean, I did some great stuff. I mean, I replaced knees and hips and shoulders, and people felt tremendously better. But ultimately, those were just high-priced Band-Aids. And you could replace somebody's knee, replace their left knee, and 2 years later, they're back in for the right knee. What you should have done was prevented the arthritis in the first place. And I think you can do that with nutrition and lifestyle in many cases.
One of the things that we were fired up about is we know that you guys very intentionally made the decision with Revero to go through the crowdfunding platform Republic. And we remember when you first publicly posted about it, I mean, you guys hit your fundraising goal of $3 million so quickly. It was like every day I was checking the numbers, and it was like thousands and thousands of dollars coming in. I mean, I'm sure that probably was an amazing feeling for you to hit the goal so quickly, right?
Yeah, I mean, initially we were kind of torn about it, because traditionally when you raise money for a startup company or healthcare company, you go through venture capital, and we did some of that, and we have some funding from there as well. But the thought was, there's this sort of relatively new phenomenon called crowd equity, which prior to 2016 was not allowed. You had to be an accredited investor, and we've had a lot of we've been in the public eye. I've been in the public eye. We have had a lot of people that have seen success and believe in what we're doing. And it was nice to see. And so initially we said, well, let's try to raise $1 million, which is a lot of money. I mean, it's definitely a lot of money. And we got that in a week. I mean, I was like, holy cow, we got $1 million in a week. So we said, well, let's max it out at 3 million, which is what we could do. And then we ended up raising just over $5 million between crowd equity and private venture capital. So now we are in the hiring engineers and designing phase, and we'll be hiring some physicians and clinical folks and some business people and some marketing people, building out the product for the next year or so. And then we'll go back to we'll go back to fundraising, probably raising, I don't know, $30 to $50 million to sort of allow us to scale at a national level and then really bring this product to the market in a way that I think is going to, impact tens, hundreds of thousands, eventually millions of people.
It's really promising to see what you're doing in the vision for it. We've had a few other guests on, Dr. Tro and Dr. Philovadia, who are doing similar concept ideas around this telemedicine business. Do you think that's a wave you see continuing to happen, or are there enough doctors out there who are willing to take that risk outside of the purview of kind of that main medical view or fields?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this is a burgeoning field. There are a lot of companies out there that have similar ideas. I look at some of some of them make me laugh, because I'm like, they're not going to work, because I saw one company that got a lot of funding. They got like $10 million of funding to design diets based on urinalysis, and I'm just like, this is just kind of, I just think it misses the point. But there's a lot of interest out there. I mean, healthcare is obviously, or health in general, is obviously a huge market. I mean, in the United States alone, we spend $3.5 trillion a year annually on chronic disease, and it's growing. Those numbers, with the current inflation, is probably closer to 5 trillion rather. So the market is there. Everybody wants a piece of that market. The people are tired of being sick. I mean, most people don't want to be on all these medications and bouncing from doctor to doctor and sort of never getting resolution and feeling frustrated. So there's a lot of frustration. There's a huge pain point. We clearly, as a country, spend so much money and our return is so bad. So, Yeah, I think alternatives are going to spring up all over the place. Where it's going to end up. We're hoping that Revero will be one of the larger players out there, and I think there's no reason we can't be. And that's our goal, is to be a very large component of the ultimate U.S. and global healthcare effort.
Is the current system sustainable in its current trajectory? Like you mentioned, the $3.5 trillion cost. I mean, that's insane.
I don't think it is. I think many people are realizing that, and a lot of people are waking up to this, because we continue to just spend more money and we dump more money into technology, which it's kind of bells and whistles stuff, but it doesn't ultimately address the problem. And I think we have to have an overhaul of the food system. We have to sort of redefine what our goals are with regard to health. And we're so fixated on lab markers and these little sort of biomarker proxy things, but we're not really treating health. And I think until we sort of say our goal is to get people off medications and make them actually healthy, so they're productive, happy, feel good, look good, perform good. Once that becomes our goal, then I think you just have to approach it a different way.
Mm-hmm. You see a number of detractors that are rooted in Western medicine that their common pushback is, everything we're hearing about these carnivore animal-based diets, they're all anecdotal. There aren't enough studies that are pointing to the efficacy of these approaches. In your perspective, how do we go about just acquiring funding or support for some of these studies, just to be able to push back on the detractors and people that are demanding for more of those studies? Because I don't know the behind the scenes mechanisms of how that works. And I imagine our audience probably doesn't either.
Yeah, well, I mean, we are, determined to do some of those studies. I mean, studies are expensive. $5 million is a lot of money, but it's not that much money when it comes to doing major clinical trials. And so we'll do some of them. There'll be some other that are being done. I mean, there's an interest here. I think that, part of that, really the thing that's really going to drive that is ultimately money. I mean, money makes the world go around. It's no surprise. And if you can show a benefit to somebody, some interested party, and it's not going to be pharma, it's not going to be, Frito-Lay, they're not going to make money off of this. So, but other people will. And, it might be Ford Motor Company, it might be, it might be Intel, it might be UPS, because once their employees stop, healthcare expenses for any major company is huge. Those are some of the biggest expenses, or those are some of the biggest expenses that they face, paying for their employees' healthcare. And as we get sicker and fatter and more people with chronic disease, those expenses just go up and up and up. And so everybody's looking for a way to reduce those costs, because if you can reduce your cost, you can make more money. And so this is just a simple solution. So if we can demonstrate, which I think we will, that we can get people off medications, like for instance, Brett, you came off of how much money were you saving a year?
$50K per infusion every 8 weeks.
Yeah, so I mean, what is that? It's $300,000 a year or something like that. So I mean, you multiply that out by thousands of people of varying degrees, and all of a sudden you're into some big money. And to not have to pay for that, because somebody's paying for that. You might have your insurance company was paying for it, but we all were paying for it through our premiums. And so, you take some of that money out of healthcare and you direct it somewhere useful. I'd rather have people doing something useful than just spending money on drugs. I mean, that don't really, ultimately just lead to chronically sick people that are just being medicated.
One of the things we talk about a lot on this podcast, and you mentioned it earlier, is the food system. And I imagine a world where if we were spending $3.5 trillion on healthcare costs and just reallocated that towards building a better food system, we would have a much smaller healthcare need. How do you view the food system as it is now? Because there's so many different aspects to it, right? Like you have real foods, you have fake foods and products. And even in the real food world, we have these arguments going on between like conventional beef production versus grass-fed and regenerative. So it's a very complicated world for people to get a grasp on what's right. Once you get to the real food equation, things get easier. But how do you see the future looking, if we do kind of pull ourselves out of this? Like, how can this actually work going forward?
Well, I mean, to the food industry's credit, I mean, they have managed to produce a lot of calories. I mean, they produce a hell of a lot of calories. They feed a lot of people, and some of that has come at the cost of individual health. The refining processes, the efficiencies, the things they're turning into food. I mean, USDA just approved cotton for human consumption. So we'll see cotton fiber being shoved into food and into processed food as a fiber additive, most likely, or as a protein. You know, they say it's going to be ground up. Cotton seeds will make like a hummus-like paste and stuff like that. So they're continually innovating and doing that to feed more people. Now the problem with that is, you know, like I said, we're just turning people into malnourished people because they're obese, but yet they're malnourished. And so I think, you know, one of the questions was about the beef industry and where do you think it's going because we have all these alternative proteins. I don't think, despite guys like Ethan Brown and Patrick Brown, Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat saying they want to make animal agriculture go away by 2035 or whatever their projected goals is, that's probably nonsense. I mean, what we're going to continue to see is the beef industry, the animal agriculture industry will continue to grow as world demand grows. You'll see these other companies pop up and they'll have a segment of the market for sure. And that's really what they want. They talk a tough game about, you know, we're going to save the planet and cut out all the cow farts and end animal suffering, all the virtue signaling nonsense. That's just smoke and mirrors. All they want to do is grow a market share. That's their real ultimate goal is just to make money. And if they can convince 20% of the people to eat Beyond Meat burgers on Mondays and Wednesdays, that's huge. I mean, that's, you know, you're into the hundreds of billions of dollars a year in that market. So that's really what they're trying to do. So I don't think the beef industry is going away anytime soon. I think, you know, there's going to be some people that give up meat. There's going to be some people that struggle to afford it. There's going to be some regulations that are going to come out there. There's going to be carbon credit and taxes and things like that. But I just don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. The beef industry, I mean, it's a $1.4 trillion industry globally, or the meat industry is, and they're going to continue to you know, want to use that. I mean, they're powerful. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of representation. They're not going to just roll up the carpet and shut the doors down and just produce plant burgers. Now they are getting into that. Now, if you look at like Cargill and Tyson and some of these other companies, they are producing a plant-based product, and they're gonna grow cultured meat as well. They just want to own everything. They want to own all of the market, and you know, it'll be further centralized. And you know, the problem with the fake meat, the lab-grown meat, is it becomes intellectual property in many cases. They'll patent some process, and they're the only ones that are allowed to do this. And so they further centralize the meat supply or the food supply, which I think is largely a bad thing. Now, today, anybody who has a patch of 40 acres can put a couple cows on there and grow beef. There's no patent about that. Now, whether it's regulated to make it tough for the average person to do it, and they make it challenging is potentially possible. I mean, it depends on what goes on. But I think I don't think that in my lifetime we'll see the end of meat in any time, shape, or form. Now, there's continued push and sort of propaganda going out there, particularly after the little kids. You know, little kids are being taught in school that meat is bad for you and it's bad for the environment and you should give it up. And the poor little animals are suffering and all this sort of basically propaganda. So but I do think that we'll see a continued, I mean, plant-based meat's not going away. Cell culture meat's going to hit the scene. And, I don't know, I'm a little skeptical about that just because of the technology that's involved. It seems like it may not be scalable. There's some really, really significant technological hurdles from a cost standpoint. Now, we may subsidize the hell out of it. It may be cost ineffective, but the government may just pay for that ineffectiveness for whatever reason. I'm not sure why. But yeah, I don't think meat is going to be completely gone anytime soon. It may not dominate the market. Right now, like Beyond Meat and that stuff and those fake meats, they represent about 1% of that market right now. It's a tiny, tiny percentage. If they can get to 20%, they would be over the moon. I don't know if they'll ever get there, but that's their goal.
Yeah, you touched on a great point. We were watching Vinnie Tortorich's documentary Beyond Impossible, which is an amazing film. And we were blown away. We had no idea that these big four packers all have fake meat commodities that they're also selling too. So I think that you touched on a really important point. One of the things that we've noticed on your podcast is you've had a number of just local farmers, ranchers on just to talk to them a little bit about their approach and their methodology. Do you see a world as you start to think about maybe the next 2 to 5 to 10 years? Do you see a world where people will try and get more intentional about how they source their meat and maybe a resurgence of like these small local processing facilities?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely people that are interested in that, and that movement's going to continue to grow. And I think, some of it will be motivated by, a desire to do better from a consumer standpoint. I think legitimately, I think there are some really good outcomes that come from that stuff. Now, is it possible to convert all 700,000 ranches in the United States to, biodynamic or not biodynamic, adaptive multi-paddock grazing situations? Probably not. I mean, honestly, probably not. But you can convert a significant percentage of it. And I think, Alan Williams has done some good research on that. He's out of Joyce Farms, I think down in Alabama, I want to say. But he's looked at it and said, if you can convert something like 40% of the current grazing operations into holistic or regenerative, you could offset the entire carbon footprint of the whole entire country, everything, transportation, industry, all that stuff would be offset just by the animals alone, which would be a really, really cool thing to do. We're seeing, like I said, there's on the intensive side, with the feedlots and stuff like that, they're going to start additives. We're going to see these red algae additives to dramatically reduce the methane emissions. All these things are going to happen in the name of climate change, sustainability. Dairy farms are using digesters now to take the manure and turn it into natural gas, and so we're going to see a further on all across the board. Intensive, extensive grazing. So that's going to be, whether it makes a difference or not, I'm not convinced it does. I don't think cows are the big issue when it comes to human directed climate change. I know there's a lot of people think that's complete nonsense as well. I don't know. I'm not a climate scientist. I'm not an expert. I can tell you the one thing I'm pretty good at is human health, and particularly my own human health. I don't need a study for me to know if I'm healthy or not. And I don't think most of us do. I think most of us can figure that out. Now, when it comes to, is the world getting hotter or colder, or what's the cause of inflation? All those things I can't confirm or deny. I just don't have the tools or the resources. I don't think any of us do. I mean, but what we can do is know, if I was in pain yesterday and I'm not in pain today? That's something we all can figure out.
Dr. Baker, one of the things I was curious to ask you is, from starting this diet until now, have you changed your stance on anything around the carnivore diet or nutrition in general?
Honestly, I don't really think so. I mean, I was never particularly dogmatic to start with. There were people out there saying, you must do this and you must do that. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I just know people eat a bunch of meat, they do well. Let's start with that assumption. And I really haven't changed much. I know there's people out there saying that you've got to do this, you've got to include this in the diet. And and I just don't find the evidence that compels me that way. I haven't been dogmatic about you have to eat grass-finished beef. I haven't been dogmatic about you must eat X amount of organ meats, or now there's people that saying, well, you must include, fruit and honey and all this stuff. And I just don't see the data that supports that in a general way. Now individually, sure, do what's going to work for you. I think meat is a superfood. I think everybody should be eating it. I think we should be eating more of it, not less of it. I think protein's particularly important. I think fat provides some essential nutrients plus an additional satiety factor. And, you can overeat fat for sure. You can overeat calories. You can get fat on a carnivore diet. It's pretty damn hard to do, Like I said, you can OD on anything. You can OD on water, but it's hard to do. I mean, it's much easier to OD on heroin than it is on water, from an amount standpoint. And certain foods are easier to overconsume or, go crazy on. Meat is not one of those. It's pretty hard. I mean, I would say if you took a kid and fed him nothing but meat his whole life and let him eat as much as he wanted or she wanted, I doubt you'd ever see a kid get significantly overweight doing that or obese. I mean, certainly not morbidly obese. And so I'm pretty confident to say that meat is a pretty safe and healthy food. And that's really the essence of this. Like I said, even in my book, which I wrote, I started writing it 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, I said, look, if you need some carbohydrates to perform, maybe you do. Go for it. It's not like veganism, and I'll use veganism as an ideology rather than as a diet, which most people, they will say that vegan is not a diet, it's an ideology. Carnivore is not an ideology. It's just basically, eat some meat and focus on your health and do what you need to do. And that's always been my message. So I can't really say I've been specifically uh, change significantly from that. Yeah, I mean, is there a benefit from uh, adding fiber to your diet? Conditionally. I've never been one to say all vegetables are toxic and poison, and no one should eat them. That's never been my message. Now, certainly some people don't do well with vegetables, and clearly there's toxins in all, fruits and vegetables that are there. And do they bother you? Yeah, some people it does, and so it's worth considering limiting, cutting back, or eliminating, if you need to. But I really, I mean, when I think about, I think, honestly, and I've given these people credit so many times. The people that started this zeroing in on health, Charles Washington and Amber O'Hearn and, the other folks and Kelly Hogan, those people that, these are people that aren't scientists, they're not PhDs, they're not nutritionists. They're just people that figured out, hey, I'm eating a bunch of meat and my health issues are going away. And I think they've got it right, quite honestly. I mean, there's some wisdom in people that just have experience, and you can science the hell out of it and try to figure out the mechanisms and try to refine that. But at the end of the day, I can't tell you how many people that said, well, I did this for a while and I thought this was the magic thing. And then a year later, they're no longer doing it. And the people that are still going, they're still doing it, weren't the people that were demanding you eat X amount of liver or kidney or brain. The people that are still doing it were like people that said, hey, just go eat some friggin' steak and eggs. And 10 years later, they're still doing it. Where the other people are they're chasing some other goal right now.
Yeah, that's what we love about your approach too, is that there's never the thing that people, I think, fail to realize about you is there's never any finger wagging. It's like, I think I've literally listened to interviews with you where you're like, look, I didn't know that it was going to work this well. It might not work well in the future, but for right now, I feel great. I eat a couple steaks when I want to eat. I don't really overthink things. And like you mentioned before, there are people that are like, look, if it's not grass-fed, grass-finished, regenerative, there's no point of even doing this diet, which we think is complete bullshit to try and tell someone that can only afford grain-finished meat, which is a way better alternative than all the shit on the inner aisle of the grocery store, to tell them to not eat meat. And that sounds like, I know that that's something that you preach a lot too. And that's how we get more people into this thing is, you start with an entry point, eat more meat, and over time you'll refine it. And maybe you'll get to that grass-fed, grass-finished point at some point down the road.
Yeah, I'll use, this guy's popular Liver King guy now, right? He's in there eating raw testicles, and people see that and they're really off put by that. They're thinking, well, people are doing it. I'm not. If that would have been my exposure to this diet, I would have written it off right away. I would have like, no way, no, I'm doing that stuff. Now, whether it's bad or good, it's besides the point. It's just, and granted, it generates a lot of traffic and clicks and views, and it's outrageous and absurd, and people like to see that stuff. And it drives some people in, and hey, it makes people question things. So they, you've got to get people's attention before you can educate them. So I get that aspect of it, but to sit there and tell people, yeah, you've got to eat, only beef from these type of producers, that have been, treated in a certain way, it does lose a lot of people that unnecessarily wouldn't need to be lost. And there's you don't want a huge barrier of entry. You want, like I can tell some truck driver dude, hey man, just stop and freaking go to Wendy's, pick up some patties on the road. They can do that. But if I tell them you got to go eat raw testicles, and 6.7, ounces of liver 3 times a week, and it's too damn hard. I mean, they can't do it. But if you just tell them, hey, go get some freaking burger patties, dude, go cook up steak and have steak and eggs at Denny's, that's fine. For most people, that's going to get you 90% of the way there. And to tell people that that's not fine, or to sort of shame them for doing that, it's just a wrong message. Because you think about it, we all live in a very privileged time and a privileged location. I mean, you got some poor kid in India that they can't scrape 2 friggin' rupees together, and you're telling them you got to have grass finished beef and all. And I'm like, hey man, go get a fucking chicken and get some eggs and do what you can do. I mean, and this is a message that works, because that is so much better than 95% of the food out there. I mean, it really is. And so I think the elitism, this is not a place for that. I think we, fortunately, we all live in the U.S. where we have access to high quality meat. We have some of the best beef in the world, some of the best quality beef, and it's generally affordable. Even though it's going up in price, it's still very affordable here. And to sort of exclude people from that is crazy in my view, because we've got a big problem. As you mentioned, how much does healthcare cost annually? $3.5 trillion and rising. And if you've got to spend, a little bit of extra money in the grocery store and you can avoid all that stuff, that's awesome. But if it's too much and you can't do that, then you're back to eating Kraft mac and cheese and ramen noodles.
Mm.
I'd rather you get a cheap tube of meat from Sam's Club for $2.99 a pound and just eat that, because you're going to get infinitely more nutrition than you are with the other crap.
Dr. Baker, you mentioned families before, and I'm curious for our audience, if they're parents, how would you recommend getting people introduced to a more animal-based diet, feeding their families, feeding their kids? Like, would you recommend a more heavy meat diet to a younger kid? Because I know a lot of adults are willing to take the risk, but they're not willing to do it for their kids.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, again, why would somebody need to do a carnivore diet? A lot of people with illnesses, Brett had ulcerative colitis. This is sort of an act of desperation. If you didn't have that, you probably never would have went carnivore. That's probably fair to say.
100%.
Right? So you get a lot of people that are in that situation. They just have to do it. I mean, they can try veganism, they can try GAPS and FODMAP and all this other stuff, but usually something that really is effective, so it works. A lot of people like it to like the way they feel. There's some people who do it for athletic purposes. Some people just want to lose a few pounds. That's fine. But most kids, I mean, I would say this, but it seems to me more and more kids are getting sick pretty early. But most like normal, healthy kids, they just need good, high quality nutrition, and they're not dealing with diseases. I think animal products should be the focus, should be the center of the diet. They should eat plenty of it. Do they need to eat it exclusively? Almost certainly not. I mean, I don't feed my kids that way. My kids love steak and they eat a hell of a lot of it. And when I cook dinner, steak, I basically say, hey, eat all your steak and then you can have whatever else you want to have after that. I don't force vegetables on them. They don't want vegetables. They're pretty happy with that. They're like, okay, Dad's cooking, we're getting steak, and then they might have some dairy, they might have some fruit, or something, maybe a few other things. But I think that's a great diet for kids. I mean, I think that really is. You're going to put your kids at a huge advantage over the kids that are eating the granola bars and the fruit leathers and the Capri Suns and the goldfish and all that garbage that most people feed them. Just feed them some steak and eggs. I mean, my kids, the nice thing I've got 4 kids, and it can be exhausting trying to keep them fed all the time, because when you're feeding them like a high carb, low satiety type of diet, they're hungry. If you got 4 kids, they're all hungry every hour, but it's not the same hour. So you got one kid wants one thing now and another kid wants something later. Now, when they're old enough, they can feed themselves. But if you're responsible for cooking or making them food all the time, you're literally all day long cooking and doling out food and taking them to eat. My strategy, I'll get them up in the morning and I'll say, hey, we're big old feast of eggs and maybe some steak or some bacon and maybe some yogurts and stuff like that. And I load them up. I mean, I eat, and then I don't hear from them. I don't hear from them for 6 hours. They're good. So it's a convenient strategy as well.
Yeah, which is very different than most people, where it's like you're just eating carbs and sugar and just a continuous drip. You're just hungry all day long and you're irritable.
Yep.
So something that we're really interested in that we wanted to talk to you about is just like the antidepressant epidemic in the US. I think there's like 3.5 million Americans that are on antidepressants. And within the last couple of years, we continually hear from people on the carnivore diet about the way that the symptoms of depression, anxiety, they almost vanish on this diet. I know it's something that Jordan Peterson has talked about, Michaela Peterson, a bunch of others. How often is that coming up with you and the patients that you work with that are switching to a meat-based approach to eating?
Yeah, constantly. This is a very, mental health issues I think the estimates are something like 20% of Americans now suffer with depression, clinically diagnosed or something like that. So I don't know how many are on antidepressants, but it's probably more than 3.5 million. It is extremely, extremely common, and common things commonly get better when you fix the nutrition. So I see mental health improvements almost universally. I mean, pretty much everybody, with rare exception. Maybe if they're under eating and they're tired, they may still lag a little bit. But most people, if they're getting sufficient nutrition from a meat-based diet, their symptoms get much, much better. I've seen things like bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, Tourette syndrome, ADHD, PTSD, all those things get much better. Now, some of it doesn't completely resolve, but it often gets remarkably better. And there's a number of reasons for that I think, there was a nice study in 2018 out of Stanford University looking at major depressive disorder, and they found that there was a pretty significant correlation between that and carnitine. Carnitine is one of these nutrients that you pretty much only get from meat. And people with depression had low carnitine levels. Now you can endogenously make some of it, but without that exogenous addition to it, your carnitine levels tend to run on the low side. And so that's one mechanism, but there's multiple. The gut-brain axis is very well recognized. If you have gut dysfunction, it often results in brain physiology alterations, brain inflammation, leaky blood-brain barrier with leaky gut. The nutrition, the zinc, the iron, which often is low on low meat diets, can be remedied with meat. Carnosine, carnitine, creatine all have positive benefits on mental health and brain function. Those things are things you can only find in animal products. And so, yeah, there's a whole bunch of reasons why that may be the case.
Dr. Baker, one of the things I was curious to ask you, and I probably should have brought it up earlier, but you mentioned some of the political stuff. Are you worried about any regulations coming in around some environmental issues when it comes to, or perceived environmental issues when it comes to beef? Is that something that you see from your level?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of things out there. I mean, particularly impacting the ability of people to produce food. I mean, and I think, some of these carbon credit things that are being talked about, which probably they're going to go into place in some countries first, and maybe they'll reach us later. They could have an impact. I think some of the tax laws are really unfair to some of the farmers and ranchers. The inheritance tax they have now. It's if you have a 5,000-acre ranch, which you're only producing maybe a couple $100,000 a year of income on, they're going to tax you on the value of the land when your father dies and hands it to you. So you may end up getting a $3 million tax bill that you can't pay, and then what do? You sell it to the government. There's a 30-30 law that's gone into effect where they want to fully have 30% of every state dedicated to national protected land. So they may seize ranch land from farmers and ranchers in like states like Nebraska where they don't have 30%. So we're going to see some farmers and ranchers with a lot of stress put on them by some of these regulations. And what it'll do is it disproportionately affect the smaller folks. The big corporations will be able to absorb that. They'll basically turn around and just get bigger and consolidate further. And I think that's, I think we should hopefully get to more decentralization rather than centralization of the food supply, because once it's centralized and it's controlled by just a few people, they got a lot of power over what you do and what you eat and what you consume. And what you eat has a huge impact on literally every aspect of your life. And so those are some of the concerning things that are out there. There's a lot of countries talking about taxing meat significantly, doubling, tripling, quadrupling the prices in many cases. There's Oregon and Colorado. We're trying to get bills on the ballot box talking about making some of the animal husbandry practices illegal. They would call like artificial insemination rape, so like sexual molestation punishable by jail time. Obviously, that's a problem. They wanted to ban slaughter, except at the animal's natural life expectancy, and so they would say, well, a cow is supposed to live 15 years or 20 years, and we're killing him at 2.5 years. That would be illegal. No one could do it. No ranchers could afford to do that. They can't keep an animal alive for 20 years, and make any. They would just lose money like crazy. And so, and the fair thing about that, or the weird thing about that, is no cow could live in the wild for 20 years. None of them would make it that far. They'd be lucky to make it even 1 year. Most of them. There's all kinds of studies on ruminant animals showing that they die very young due to predation, starvation, disease, and so on. Freezing death, whatever. And so the only way they could live a long time is in domestic care. Like you'd have a little cow sanctuary, and no one's going to be able to afford to do. Who could afford to do that? You have all your taxpayers going to keep cows to live to 20 years of age. That's just ludicrous. No one's going to do that.
Mm-hmm. When you think about just like the future of our food system and maybe even just society in general, are you hopeful for what the future holds?
Yeah, I'm hopeful. I mean, I think that, it's not something that's going to happen passively. I think we all have to be active and aggressive, and I think we just have to really fight for what we can do. But I'm optimistic that we can preserve and improve the food system and our nutrition and our overall health and society's health. When we talk about sustainability, a sick society is not sustainable. This is a big problem. If and no one really seems to know this information, but the healthcare sector produces 10% of our greenhouse gases. If you even want to make that argument, cows are 2%. So, you know, the healthcare sector, which you were participating in to the tune of $50,000 every 8 weeks, was producing all this greenhouse gases, and now you're consuming meat, and you've cut that risk by, you know, what, 800%, you know? So, I mean, it's you know, significant, or 400%. I forget the math on that. Anyway, from 10% to 2%, whatever that is, you know, so yeah, I mean, I think we have when we make these arguments, it's very easy to be reductionist, you know, to make these reductionist arguments. Well, if a cow farts, it produces this much greenhouse gas, and we're going to save the world if we just shut off the cow farts. Well, what are the downstream effects? That you get more malnourished people, more sick people. You don't get a chance to sequester carbon. What about all the manure? Where are you going to get that from? You're going to increase your, you know, your petroleum-based fertilizer utilization. You know, there's all these, you know, unintended consequences. And whenever we see these big government interventions, you know, you always see the effects 20 years later, and everybody's like, damn, we shouldn't have done that. So it's one of those times where you can stand up and say, I think, you know, one of the interesting things is, you know, it's becoming more and more politicized. You know, we're getting more and more, you know, these issues are associated with these people, and these issues are associated with other people, and diet is becoming that way. The nice thing about it is, before maybe people didn't care about diet, I think more people are interested in not eating the bugs. I mean, I think that's a powerful emotional, which is good. You can use it to our advantage. You know, before, you know, like the vegans they'll show you some pig in a cage and say, oh, look how terrible this is, and everybody gets emotional about it. It's an emotional argument. But I think, you know, having Greta Thunberg, or whatever her name is, telling you to eat the bugs also is very powerful and emotionally evocative. So I think we can use that to the advantage of getting people to fired up about nutrition and caring where their food comes from and caring what they're able to eat.
Dr. Baker, who are you seeing out there who's having a particularly strong influence, whether it's like a researcher, doctors, ranchers, that have kind of inspired you to continue to put up a good fight?
Oh, wow. I mean, there's a lot of people. I mean, you know, certainly I think some of the folks in the regenerative agricultural sector, you know, whether it's Gabe Brown or, you know, Joel Salatin, or, you know, Ray Archuleta, or on and on. There's a whole slew of those guys that, you know, people are aware of. Those guys, I think, you know, are passionate. I think that's exciting to see. There's several researchers out there. Stefan Van Vliet at Utah State, now formerly of Duke, is doing some good work. You know, there's you know, I think there are some politicians out there that are getting, most of them are from agricultural states, you know, that are trying to preserve this sort of stuff. And so there are a lot of people that have an interest in this now. I think, you know, guys like, you know, Joe Rogan. I mean, he's pro meat guy for sure. He's got a huge platform. And some of the, I think some of the athletes that are getting out and getting behind this stuff, you know, like you mentioned, Noah, from he's playing for the Angels now, right?
Angels, yeah.
Yeah. So he was with the Mets, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I mean, so I think there's a lot of people out there that are starting to step up and starting to realize that we have to step up. I mean, you can't be passive, and this is a thing. You know, I'm optimistic about the future if people care about it. You know, granted, 90% of the people got their head down and they don't care, but I think, you know, you don't need you know, that many people. You need a solid 5-10% that are vocal. And we can learn something from the vegans who have been very vocal and whiny and annoying. But, you know, I think you got to fight fire with fire. And so I think we need to get out there and meme those guys to death, and, you know, ridicule, and, you know, just go on the offense instead of playing defense all the time. And I think because it's been one-sided, and the story we've been told is very inaccurate, or there's a lot of half-truths out there. You know, they tell you part of the story. They don't tell you the whole story. They tell you a little bit. They tell you the emotional side that you know, that works. I mean, quite honestly, I mean, to their credit, what they've done has been very successful with pulling the heartstrings, and they've been very strategic on where they're placing people. They're getting people in places of power. You know, Cory Booker, you know, Senator Eric Adams, New York City Mayor. So they're getting people that have more and more sort of control over our lives in these positions, and we need to do the same. We need to, you know, and we need not to just. I think it's already too far one way. I mean, we already, you know, the U.S. diet is already plant-based. I mean, you guys know that 70% of our diet is plant-based, and most of it's ultra-processed garbage. We need to move we don't need to just go back to that and not go more plant-based. We need to shift that back to where 70% of our diet is high-quality nutrition, most of it coming from animal products. I think that's where we need to set the bar. And so that's what I think needs to happen.
Yeah. There's a lot at stake. No pun intended.
It really is. I mean, that's why we need to keep having conversations like this and promote it and just share it with friends and family. And like, we try to just never wag our finger in anyone's faces. We just try and lead by proof of work. We know you do that too. And, you know, just really appreciate you coming on and having this conversation and just leading the charge and being vocal, because the world needs more of it right now. What's the best way, Dr. Baker, for people to just connect with you a little bit more on social media, learn more about what you've got going on, Revero, et cetera?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, I think Revero, I'm there every single day doing a Zoom call like this. And so I'm happy to talk to anybody. You know, I dedicate an hour today just to answer people's questions. So if you want to just like have an actual semblance of a conversation, that's the best way. But, you know, my social media accounts, which, I mean, honestly, some of it I do just, again, the entertaining stuff, the goofy stuff. You know, I put up studies and I try to educate people. It's always funny because those things get very little engagement. No one seems to care. But if you put up a picture of you eating a steak while some vegan is making some wacky watermelon tuna concoction, you get way more interaction. So you know, it's that. So social media is, you know, it's a mix of, you know, entertainment, education, you know, sometimes motivation, sometimes just I'm pissed off and want to share that with people. But so I've got, you know, like I said, different social media accounts, Instagram, Shawn Baker 1967, Twitter, where you guys spend a lot of time, S Baker MD. I'm on, YouTube. My YouTube channel's growing nicely, Shawn Baker MD. I'm on TikTok now, which I'm I laugh about that, but I'm on Shawn Baker MD on TikTok, and that's slowly growing up there as well. So that's
mostly you eating steak on TikTok.
I think some of it, you know, I mean, it varies depending on what I'm in the mood to do. But you know, we're making an effort to sort of upgrade my social media a little bit with some more resources now that we have a little bit of funding that we can kind of dedicate. Because, you know, quite honestly, I'm still kind of the face and the voice, public image of the company, and I'm trying to just grow awareness of what we're doing. I mean, ultimately, like all the bullshit and the crazy, silly stuff I do, at the end of the day, my goal is to help people get healthy. And, you know, that's the end of the day. You know, all the other stuff is just, you know, it's just fluff, quite honestly. And it's fun sometimes. Sometimes it's fun. Sometimes it's not. But at the end of the day, that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, we have the utmost respect for everything you're doing, and you've changed our lives for the better. So, you know, a thank you again is due, and really appreciate you coming on today. This has been an insightful conversation. I hope our audience gets a lot out of it.
Yeah, me too. And like I said, don't hesitate to reach out and, you know, shoot me a message or something like that. I'm usually pretty good at answering those. And, you know, maybe I'll run into you guys. Well, I'll run into you guys in Austin, I think. I assume let's hook up and grab a steak or some brisket or something like that in a couple of weeks. So
yeah, we'll do Terry Black, since we can't do Fogo de Chao. So
yeah, Terry Black's good. I've been there. Got nice big beef ribs. You know, they're right near the Palmer Center, so it's not far from there. I think you can walk there from there or something like that. So awesome.
Perfect. Well, we appreciate it, Dr. Baker. Thank you again, and looking forward to connecting with you again soon.
Perfect. All right, guys.
Thanks, brother.